Welcome to our discussion video for financial assets in government accounting. The concept of the financial assets in our financial accounting is essentially the same when it is applied in government accounting. So, we look at items which are unique in government accounting, and we try to expound more on the rules and procedures on how we deal with financial assets when we look at the government as an industry, as a separate and unique industry. So at the end of this discussion, we will be able to define the financial asset at the context of government accounting, and we give examples. We account for cash and cash equivalents, uh, account for receivables and investments which are unique in government accounting. So let us look at financial assets at the point of view of a financial instrument. So according to the Philippine Public Sector Accounting Standards 28.9, a financial instrument is any contract that gives rise to both a financial asset of one entity and a financial liability or equity instrument of another entity. So ang orientation natin when we look at financial asset siya at the government pero financial liability siya of another entity. So ganon ang orientation. So that is the concrete definition of financial instrument in the PPSAS. So, what are these financial assets mentioned in government accounting? So, we look at the financial asset generally are initially measured at the fair value plus the transaction cost. So, um, when we say transaction costs in government, we look at the fees and commissions paid to agents, advisors, brokers, or dealers, to the levies by regulatory agencies and security exchanges, and the transfer taxes and duties. So, kailangan natin i-capitalize yan dun sa financial asset for us to determine the correct amount of recognition of that particular financial asset. So, later on, maka-classify naman natin yung iba pang financial assets, especially on the part of the investments. So, the financial assets in government accounting will look at the cash and cash equivalents, receivables, investments, and derivatives. So, ito yung mga items na titingnan natin in government accounting uh, under financial assets. So when we look at the financial assets, first yung cash and cash equivalents, we look at the cash on hand, the cash in bank, and the cash treasury accounts. The cash on hand and cash in bank ay alam naman na natin yan as it is discussed in your financial accounting 1. And the cash treasury accounts is unique in government accounting. So tingnan natin yung iba pang nakapailalim dito sa mga cash and cash equivalents na ito. At ano yung unique when we look at government accounting. So under the cash and cash equivalents, okay, we look at the adjustments for unreleased commercial checks, the accounting for canceled checks, and the petty cash fund. So, hindi na natin iisa-isahin yung concepts under cash and cash equivalents because yan ay na-discuss na sa iyong conceptual framework and accounting standards related to cash and cash equivalents. So, ang orientation mo in government accounting is to look into items na unique in government accounting na kailangan mong ma-identify kasi the rest will be the same accounting procedures. So, meron tayong tinatawag na unreleased commercial checks, and this will have an effect on your cash accounts. So, ano ibig sabihin nitong unreleased commercial checks? Ito yung mga na-draw or naka-prepare na ng mga cheque but is not yet delivered or it is not yet given to the payee, the supplier, kung sino man yung dapat pagbigyan ng cheque at the end of the period of an accounting period or a fiscal period in the case of a government accounting. So, okay. Ibig lang sabihin nito, nakadraw na yung cheque, pirmado na lahat ng signatory. So, ang lacking na lang is yung mismong pag-deliver or pagpapareceive ng cheque. Pero naabutan ka ng cut-off ng accounting period. So, how do you recognize this and how this will affect your cash account? 'Di ba initially, when you draw the check, yan ay may corresponding journal entry voucher. At ang nakalagay sa journal entry voucher mo is debit various expenses, kung anong klaseng expenses man yan, and then credit mo yung iyong cash in bank local currency. So, since this is a commercial check. So, debit various expenses, credit, cash in bank local currency current. Kaya current kasi yan ay checking account. Okay. So dahil yan ay nakarecognize na as credit sa iyong cash in bank local currency current account, ibig sabihin binawas mo na yan sa cash in bank na libro mo, sa libro mo, pero sa iyong bank account ay hindi pa yan nababawas kasi hindi pa nga na-deliver sa iyong payee. So how do you recognize this? To reflect the correct cash balance. So ang kailangan mo lang gawin ay to revert back the cash, to revert back yung cash. So you debit cash in bank, local currency current, and then credit accounts payable or any other liability account para i-set up mo. Okay, and then sa susunod na taon, i-revert mo lang uli. Debit accounts payable, credit cash in bank, local currency current. The question is, kailangan ba physically i-cancel yung cheque? The answer is no. Hindi naman kailangan na physically ay i-cancel uli and then at the start of the another year ay mag-draw uli tayo ng panibagong cheque. Hindi naman kailangan na ganun. So, pwede naman na i-safe keep or for custody and proper monitoring. Basta nakarecognize sa libro mo na sinet up, ni-revert mo yung unreleased commercial check na yan, okay na yon. So, meron naman tayong monitoring for all unreleased commercial checks dapat. Okay, so kung titingnan mo, this is applicable for commercial checks alone. So, ibig sabihin, yung mga cash modified disbursement system check na diniscuss natin earlier, yung MDS account, hindi natin yan ginagawa ng ganitong treatment simply because the MVS accounts are zeroed out at the end of the period, 'di ba? Automatic nagre-revert 'yan sa National Treasury. So, hindi na natin kailangan gawan ng ganitong entry 'yan. Next, accounting for canceled checks. Okay, when we say canceled checks, these are checks na nakadraw na pero because of conditions ay kailangan natin siyang i-cancel. One is yung stale, second is voided or spoiled. When we say stale, ibig sabihin yan ay kumbaga expired yung cheque. So, ano ba ang expiration ng cheque? For commercial checks, it is 6 months from the date of the check. Kapag MDS check is 3 months from the date of the check. Okay? From the date of the check. Okay. So, kung January 1 yan, so bumilang ka ng 6 months mula January 1, pag lumagpas doon, stale na yan. So, kailangan lang niya na how do you account for this? It will depend whether it is a commercial check or whether it is an MDS check. Kapag MDS check, meron pa yung qualification kung yan ba ay MDS check ng current year or yan ay MDS check ng prior year. So, ano kailangan lang gawin? Halimbawa, cancel, stale, voided, or spoiled naman, kapag halimbawa merong unnecessary, halimbawa nadumihan yung cheque, o kaya napunit, o kaya ay nasulatan, nagkaroon ng erasure na hindi acceptable. So, therefore, yan ay voided or spoiled na kailangan lang natin ibalik yan doon sa nag-issue. So, in this case, dahil ikaw yung government, ikaw yung nag-a-account niyan, kailangan i-present sa'yo yung original cheque, then bago ka mag-issue ng replacement check. So, ganun lang naman ang procedure natin dyan. Okay, how do you recognize in your books yung canceled check? Unahin natin kapag commercial check. Kapag commercial check, wala tayong problema. So for canceled commercial checks, yung ang kailangan lang natin is to debit your cash in bank local currency current and then i-credit mo lang yung accounts payable or any liability for that matter. So walang problema doon sa commercial check whether it is from current year or prior period. So kung 2021 na ngayon, kahit na commercial check pa yan ng 2020, kung natanggap mo yan at dahil yan ay na-stale or na-void or na-spoiled, ang appropriate entry mo lang dyan is to debit cash in bank, local currency current, and then credit yung appropriate accounts payable or liability account. The question now lies on when it is an MDS check. Kapag yan kasi Modified Disbursement System check, remember, yan ay check kay halimbawa ng nakaraang taon. Di ba nag-automatic revert ang iyong cash sa MDS account. So therefore, kailangan mong ma-ascertain whether it is a check ng nakaraang taon. Paano mo makikita yon? Tingnan mo lang yung check date. So kung yan ay 2020, therefore yan ay MDS check of the prior period. Pero kung 2021, that is an MDS check of the current year. Okay. Kung yan ay current year, wala tayong problema. You just have to debit cash, MDS regular, and then credit accounts payable or any liability account for that matter. Kung yan naman ay prior period, hindi mo na pwedeng gamitin yung cash MDS regular kasi wala nang balance yung account na yun sa bank. So, ang kailangan mo lang gawin is to debit accumulated surplus or deficit and then credit accounts payable or liability account for that matter. Simply because yung MDS account is zeroed out at the end of the period kaya ginamit na natin yung accumulated surplus or deficit. Sir, paano po ang gagawin dyan doon sa dahil zero out na yung MDS regular na yan, meron pa tayong accounts payable na nakaset up for that prior period. Kailangan lang natin requestan yan sa ating sa accounting unit, division making the letter, and then pwede natin i-request sa DBM for the issuance of yung fund para doon sa mga accounts payable for the prior period. Because remember, hindi mo pwedeng gamitin yung funds mo in the current year, yung appropriations for the current year para doon sa mga expenses for the defrayal of in defraying expenses related to prior period. So kung current, appro dapat sa current expenses. Kung prior, dun sa prior. Okay? Huwag natin i-embezzle yung funds because that would not amount to malversation, to technical malversation. Okay, next is the petty cash fund. Okay, this is comprehensively discussed under Chapter 6, Section 2 of the Government Accounting Manual for the national government agencies. Okay, but we will look at the salient provisions of the chapter 6. So we look at the petty cash fund. So essentially, the basic concepts na natutunan mo sa petty cash fund will be applied to the petty cash fund in government accounting. So these are the items that we have to emphasize. 1. HOA approval. This is the head of the agency approval. Head of agency approval. So the head of agency shall approve the amount of PCF to be established, which shall be sufficient to defray recurring petty expenses for 1 month. So ito yung sufficient to defray 1 month expenses na naka-indicate dito. Okay? So hindi pwede na magse-set up or mag-establish ka ng petty cash fund without the approval of the head of agency. Yung approval naman na yan is just a mere letter normally doon sa accounting endorsing a particular employee na maging petty cash fund custodian, and then it will be approved, recommended by the head of the finance, and then will approved by the head of the agency. So kailangan lang yung documentation related to approval kasi bago ka mag-set up ng journal entry mo for the establishment of the petty cash fund through debit petty cash fund and then credit yung cash MDS regular, ay kailangan ng attachments ng head of agency approval. So yung i-establish natin na petty cash fund will depend on the sufficiency to defray 1 month expenses. So kung mataas ang defraying ng expenses mo based on your analysis of your expenses for a particular period, for a 6 months or 1 year period, ay it will depend kung gaano kalaking petty cash fund ang kinakailangan natin. Basta ang ini-indicate dyan ay it is sufficient to defray 1 month expenses. So wag naman susobra na 2 month expenses na ang inilalagay natin sa petty cash fund. Okay? So the petty cash fund custodian shall be properly bonded whenever the establishment of fund is exceeding 5,000. So normally, ang petty cash fund ay nag-i-exceed talaga ng 5,000. Okay? So ibig sabihin, kailangan yan ay bonded. So you will be meeting the term bonded when you go to the government sector. So what does bonded means? It means an insurance shall be taken on the custodian. In the event that the custodian misuses the funds, the entity can claim from the insurance company, and the insurance company in turn will go after the custodian. So this is a security on the part of the government na kung sakali man na magloko yung petty cash fund custodian, itinakbo niya for personal use or many other factors, ay meron tayong hahabulin, yung insurance bonding the petty cash fund custodian to the bond. Okay? Okay, the use of the impress system. You know already the concept of the impress system, that all ibig sabihin lang under the impress system ay properly accounted on a daily basis yung cash on hand at yung unreplenished expenses. So dapat yan ay naka-equal dun sa yung ledger balance. Next, it shall not be used to pay regular expenses such as rentals and utilities. This is also true even in financial accounting related to petty cash fund. Hindi naman talaga ginagamit yung PCF for regular expenses such as rentals and utilities because yan ay regular and recurring. So dapat ito ay yung mga petty, maliliit at hindi regular expenses na kinakailangan. Okay? Okay, one provision under the Government Accounting Manual is this limit. Yung PCF payment shall not exceed 15,000 for each transactions with exceptions by law or by COA. No to splitting. Okay, you have to understand this because in practice, this has been a circumvented. Ano ibig sabihin lang nito? Dapat yung PCF payments mo, kasi kung halimbawa ang petty cash fund ay 40 or 50,000, the petty cash fund payment shall not exceed 15,000 for each transaction. So, hindi pwede na isang transaction ay 18,000 unless it is expressly provided by the law or it is allowed by the Commission on Audit. Kasi kung ganyan kalaki, ay mabilis ang pag-replenish mo ng funds. So, ibig sabihin, kung ganyan kalaki, dapat yan ay on a separate disbursement voucher na at wag nang kuhanin sa yung petty cash fund. So, kaya, kumbaga, hindi na yan classified as petty. Okay? Unless it is exempted by the law or by the COA na pwede yang kuhanin sa petty cash fund, which is a very rare circumstance. Kaya ang rule dapat dyan, to be safe, kung ikaw ay government accountant, huwag kang mag-defray ng expenses o huwag mong i-allow yung paggamit ng petty cash fund that exceeds for transactions exceeding 15,000. Okay, ano yung sinasabi kong no to splitting? Okay, this happens in the government wherein ang transaction ay 15,000 pero ang ginagawa nila ay ini-split nila on separate petty cash voucher, gagawing tatlong 5,000. So, para daw makalusot sa petty cash fund. However, the concept of the limit 15,000 should not be viewed as substance. Hindi pwedeng hindi yung substance, the concept of substance over form. Hindi pwede na nakalagay nga sa petty cash voucher na 5,000 pero kapag tinignan mo yung attachment, pare-parehas ng date, pare-parehas ng supplier, pare-parehas ng nature at period. Ibig sabihin, in-split niya lamang. Yung 15,000 na dapat ay nasa iisang petty cash voucher ay pinaghiwa-hiwalay lamang ng petty cash voucher, and saka yung attachments ay pinaghiwa-hiwalay. So, the substance over form rule will apply here. So, hindi pwede yung splitting because this is you can be subjected to an audit observation memorandum. So, pwedeng ma-notice yan ng Commission on Audit at that is a violation, a clear violation of the rules of the Government Accounting Manual, Chapter 6, yung related sa petty cash fund. Okay, so lagi nating titingnan that the form hindi dapat above 15,000 pero yung substance hindi rin siya dapat over 15,000. Hindi pwedeng i-split po yan kasi makikita natin yung date, yung nature, yung supplier dun sa attachments. Okay? Canvas from at least 3 suppliers is required for purchases greater than 1,000 except for purchases while on official travel. So, ano sinasabi dito? Kung ikaw ay may bibiling items na lagpas ng 1,000, yan dapat ay merong canvas from at least 3 suppliers. Sir, what does a canvas means? Ibig sabihin lang, bago ka sana bumili ng item na lagpas ng 1,000, dapat ay meron kang request for quotation sa at least 3 suppliers para naman makita natin kung ikaw ba ay nakamura. So, ibig sabihin, kung bibili ka ng halimbawa, ano ba ang normaling binibili? For example, bibili ka ng ream of bond paper for emergency use kasi hindi pa dumadating yung supplies. Kailangan magpa-quote ka sa tatlong legitimate suppliers para makita natin kung saan ka makamura at yung pinaka mababang presyo doon ka dapat bumili. So that is the rule. Okay? So ibig sabihin kapag iyan ay more than 1,000, dapat may attachment yung petty cash voucher na canvas from at least 3 suppliers para ma-check ng accounting unit kung talaga bang sumusunod tayo on the efficiency. Okay? Dapat ay yung pinakamababa ang binilhan natin. Supporting documents such as PCVs, invoice, and OR. So, dapat may supporting documents. The replenishment at 75% level or as needed. So, the general rule is that the 75% level, pwede ka na mag-replenish ng iyong petty cash fund kapag at least 75% na ng fund ang nagamit or as needed. So, or as needed, dapat yan ay mayroong approval na i-attach doon. Okay? So, may letter yan. Kung hindi pa 75% yung level, merong attachment justification approved by the head of the agency or proper authorities na ina-approve na i-replenish yung fund kahit na hindi pa na-achieve yung 75% level. So, it will depend on the justification on the letter. Okay? But the general rule is that it is replenished at 75% level. Okay, we look at the cash shortage or overage of a disbursing officer. Okay, how do we, the disbursing officer is liable for any cash shortage, while any cash overage that he cannot satisfactorily explain to the auditor is forfeited in favor of the government. Okay. Any cash overage that he cannot satisfactorily explain is forfeited in favor of the government. So, normally kasi ang mga disbursing officer ay merong mga surprise audit na ginagawa ang Commission on Audit dyan. So, therefore, ma-ascertain natin kung mayroon ba siyang cash shortage or cash overage at a particular period of time. So, kung mayroong nakitang cash overage na hindi niya ma-explain kung saan nanggaling, it shall be deposited at the depositary bank of the government. At kung mayroong shortage naman, liable siya doon, kailangan niyang palitan. Okay, what happens when the relevant provision of the law under the Revised Penal Code Article 217, sinasabi doon na merong prima facie evidence kapag yung isang public officer, especially a disbursing officer, ay nakita na hindi niya properly na-account or hindi niya properly na-monitor yung funds related to his custody, to his or her custody, yun daw ay prima facie evidence na the missing funds, halimbawa may mga nawawala or any property, ay ginamit niya for personal use. So that is a prima facie evidence according to the Revised Penal Code. So medyo mabigat yung responsibility when you are a disbursing officer or collecting officer in the government. So how do you recognize in the journal entry kapag merong mga ganitong klase, halimbawa cash shortage? To recognize the cash shortage of a disbursing officer, kailangan i-recognize natin yung entries such as debit due from officers and employees and then credit advances for or to kung ano mang klaseng advances yun. Ibig sabihin lang nito, nililipat mo yung advances nililipat mo dun sa due from officers and employees. Remember, yan ay receivable accounts kasi. Okay? Kaya due from officers and employees. Ngayon, kapag naman na-restitute na yung cash shortage or nabayaran na, you have to debit cash collecting officer kung sino yung nangolekta or kung sino yung pinagbayaran, and then credit due from officers and employees. Ibig sabihin nito, nagbayad na yung may short. Okay. Kapag naman itong si cash collecting officer, saan niya naman to idadalhin? Idadala niya yan sa it is remitted directly to the Bureau of Treasury. So debit cash, Treasury Agency Deposit Regular, and then credit cash collecting officer to recognize the remittance of restituted cash shortage to the BTR. So remember I am discussing using the slide, but I am also referring to the book. Okay, for your easy reference kung saan ko kinukuha yung discussions natin. Okay? When it is a cash overage, you have to recognize the forfeiture of cash overage of the disbursing officer, you debit cash collecting officer and then credit miscellaneous income. When it is remitted, debit cash treasury, agency deposit regular, and then credit cash collecting officer, directly remitted. So therefore, lahat ng shortage and overages are directly remitted to the cash treasury, agency deposit regular, and not on the commercial bank account or dun sa MDS checks, MDS account ng iyong agency. Directly dinedeposit dun sa cash treasury, agency deposit regular. Doon siya naka-record para mas madaling ma-identify kung nasaan para mas madali natin ma-identify yung mga shortages and overages ay na-deposit pa sa naibalik ba talaga sa treasury. Okay? Because sometimes this is a measure also of performance of a particular disbursing or collecting officer. Meron yung effect. Okay, the concept of dishonored check. This is a check that is not accepted when presented for payment. Alam mo naman na kung anong ibig sabihin ng dishonored check through DAIF, drawn against insufficient fund, DAO, drawn against uncleared deposit, and drawn against a closed account. So lahat yan ay bounce check or tumatalbog. Okay, halimbawa may nagbayad sa'yo ng cheque, inisyuhan mo ng official receipt, tapos nung dineposit mo sa iyong commercial account na ay nag-bounce or dishonor ng bank yung cheque through reasons na naka-indicate dyan, yung DAIF, DAOD, and closed account. So how do you recognize transactions such as that? You have to record it to the other receivables account. So kailangan i-cancel mo yung official receipt noon. Okay, inform mo yung nagbayad sa'yo through a notice of dishonored check. Then you cancel the related OR. Okay, so walang problema tayo dyan kapag ni-replace niya yung cheque, binayaran niya ng cash, or nagkaroon kayo ng arrangement. Wala tayong magiging problema doon. But the rules of procedure will be followed in case hindi nag-comply yung drawer ng cheque. Okay, appropriate legal actions shall be coursed through the drawer of a bounce check. So pwede siyang i-subject under the PP 22, yung Batas Pambansa 22 or the bouncing check law. Okay. So, appropriate entry, record mo lang sa other receivable account and then i-credit mo dun sa appropriate cash in bank account mo. Okay, let's proceed with the bank reconciliation statements. When I was in a government agency, I was preparing for parang 12 funds. So parang 12 bank accounts ang piniprepare ko, yung 12 bank reconciliation statements with appropriate supporting documents. So yung bank reconciliation na ginagawa mo is essentially the same na ginagawa sa government accounting, but they are following the adjusted balance method. Okay? Wala na yung book to bank, bank to book. They are following. According to the GAM, please follow the adjusted balance method. So this is an internal control as to check the correctness of the cash in bank accounts, and this is as a deterrent to fraud para maiwasan yung mga nawawalang funds. Kasi dito kitang-kita yung mga outstanding check, mga deposits in transit, debit memo, credit memo, errors in the bank, errors in the recording in the books of yung affecting yung mga cash in bank accounts. Okay, so bago kami mag-prepare dapat bago namin i-generate, because in government you only generate the financial statements, especially the statement of financial position. Kailangan nakabangga na agad yung bank reconciliation statement ko, kasi doon pa lang makikita ko na kung meron bang error doon sa recording ng cash in bank accounts. This is prepared 10 days from receipt of monthly bank statements. So, kasi ang bank statements ay nanggagaling sa mga bangko, and then matagal normally ang pagdating niyan. Pero ngayon meron na tayong tinatawag na yung yung electronic access, yung we-access, especially in the land bank, yung we-access. So, meron na tayong e-banking. So, pwede na natin gamitin yung statements na nandoon sa e-banking for us to easily prepare yung bank reconciliation statements. So, this is according just in the GAMS na kapag na-receive mo daw yung monthly bank statements, this is prepared dapat mag-prepare ka 10 days. And then, yung 4 copies shall be submitted 20 days from receipt to COA, to the head of the agency, to the accounting division, and the bank if necessary. Sir, bakit magkaiba? Bakit may sabi prepare 10 days from receipt? So, ang sinasabi lang dito ay you have to prepare yung bank reconciliation kasi merong date naman doon. Prepared, halimbawa, prepared by Sherwin Santos, so may date and then signature. So, yun ang titingnan naman doon. The submission naman to the COA shall be 10 days from the receipt. So, ibig sabihin, meron ka pang period doon. Okay? From the receipt to COA. From receipt sa bank ng mga bank statement, then ibibigay doon sa 4 COA, head of agency, accounting division, and bank if necessary. Yung bank, it is not really necessary to give copies, especially when there are no reconciling items related to bank error. So normally magbibigay ka lang dyan ng mga bank reconciliation statements or other reconciling items kung meron kang nakitang bank error. Pero kung wala naman, it is not really necessary to provide BRS to the banks. So, a journal entry voucher shall be prepared for reconciling items. So, kung merong mga reconciling items, mga error, debit memo, credit memo, and many other items, ay mag-prepare ka ng journal entry voucher para bangga iyong cash in bank sa libro at yung cash in bank sa iyong bank accounts. Okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I have to end my discussion by at this point. Okay, we will be continuing next on receivables on the succeeding video. Thank you.